Hello and welcome to What the Flick. I'm Matt Atchity. This week, Trading Places has been re-released on Blu-ray and DVD for its 35th anniversary. And you might remember earlier in the week, we talked about it a little bit. It was actually my DVD recommendation. But then as I was talking on air, on camera, I thought, oh, right, yes. And we spoke about this. There's a scene in that movie that, among other things that are a little problematic, one of them is Dan Akroyd in blackface as a Jamaican man. And I thought, you know what, we need to talk about this. And so I brought in a couple of people that I definitely want to hear their opinion and give them a space to talk about this. So I brought in Jayar Jackson, who you may know from the main show, The Young Turks, and Jacorey Palmer from the legendary Arthur and Jacorey in the Morning. So thank you guys for coming on and talking about this. I'm really excited to have you guys here.
Yeah, good stuff. It's one of those things, specifically about this movie. It's a classic, it's a cult classic, it's a mainstream classic. Everyone knows this movie. And still, this scene somehow flies under the radar. At least throughout history has. For many people who even recognize it, then it happens and you go, oh, but you know, Eddie Murphy's in the scene too. That's generally been the consensus of it. And actually I think it's a good idea to bring it up and talk about it because it's one of those movies that is so beloved. You know, there'll be plenty of movies in the history of blackface where people will say, oh, but man, that movie was just horrible. But people love this movie. So then it gives you a chance to unpack something you may be overlooking, which we sometimes criticize people for, because you have to now face something you like. I mean, check it out. One last point about this. The Cosby Show, should that still be syndicated? Can you still laugh at the jokes that Cliff Huxtable makes? Because we know what type of horrible person he was or is. Do you have to try and figure out what to do to approach it without the thought of, oh, nobody can laugh at anything anymore, which is, again, is gonna be another point that people will make.
Right, yeah.
So I'm glad we can discuss it.
Okay, Jacorey, I know you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, for sure. So first and foremost, blackface is never okay. It doesn't matter what time, what the context is. It has only ever been used to negatively reflect stereotypes about black people and other people of color. It has never ever been used to uplift or to help any perception. So starting from there, I think this film is a very clear interpretation of people in power not having the diversity to understand what affects people in certain ways and what is an offensive joke, what is a hurtful thing, what is a traumatizing thing, and what the things that are attached to that mentally are and historically, you know? Because you look at that and you say, oh, we'll just have Dan Akroyd go in there in blackface, what's wrong with that? And then three white guys go, yeah, nothing, I don't see anything wrong with it. That's the epitome of this movie, you know what I mean?
Right, and I would say, you know, in the history of that movie, like that's very early in Eddie Murphy's career, and you have to figure at that point,
he's 21 in that movie.
He's 21, and does he have the standing at that point to say to Dan Akroyd and to John Landis, who is, you know, on a continuing series of hit movies, hey guys, this isn't okay.
Well, that's the exact position that black people have put in constantly. We have to make that decision of, do I address this super problematic thing that's happening, going on, or do I let the powers that be kind of, you know, have their way, and they're the ones that are allowed to be comfortable at my expense, at the expense of my psyche. It's always that position. And of course, you know, you're forced to make a decision in the moment. He made his decision, and I have a hard time faulting him for that, especially with the context. He was young, there's probably a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of veteran actors and writers on that movie. And side note, Senator Al Franken was in this movie.
Totally.
But yeah, it's a complicated thing, especially when you're the one put in that position, you know?
Because there'd be multiple reasons why, again, in the history of doing blackface, that it would be, first off, of course, the stereotypical actions and comedy they thought that they would have at the expense of certain folks, which also degrade them and put them at a lower level of society. We know that part. Also, it would take jobs from potential black actors that could play a position, play a role in a film back in the day. When they're like, why would we hire someone and actually give them a role as a skilled actor in something when we could have a white guy do it and just put in blackface? And even if they're doing a serious scene or role, they would do it with a white person playing it because that's who we hire. We don't hire black people. So it would also disenfranchise them from participating in this craft, honestly. But this one went directly to making fun of. And we know the film, he's Lionel
Joseph.
From Jamaica, and all they did was chant back and forth with Eddie Murphy. So the thing is, next question, I think we can pretty much determine that it's inappropriate, and we can become woke later without feeling guilty about laughing at it in 1987 when you saw it, even though it was made 83. But when I was 4 years old, maybe 7, 8 years old, you watch, you go, oh, they're laughing. It's a funny scene, right? And you kind of miss what happened or what they were doing. I do think the majority of the time I see these films like this, the old Eddie Murphy movies, Trading Places, Coming to America, you'll see them at 10 o'clock at night on some random cable channel. And they edit out a lot. I was just watching Beverly Hills Cop last night. They edit out a lot.
Yeah.
They can edit this sections of that scene out.
Interesting. Oh yeah, that hadn't occurred to me, but they totally could.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important scene with what they were doing with changing if you remember the film,
right?
Where they exchange suitcases and they're actually giving them the wrong information, and it's going to go to the rich guys, and they're going to screw themselves over. Cool. It's a major part of the story.
Yeah.
But there has to be some way you can work around this. So you can obviously make sure people know we made a mistake with this back in the day. We're not going to continue to push this.
I mean, I'm of the mindset where if your movie has the crux of the plot point be something about blackface or like has to include blackface to make it work, then as always, it always is, blackface is lazy. It's lazy in that regard. So that's your fault. That's not on me.
Okay.
And especially 35 years later, after it's already had its critical success, like you said, it's a cult classic, you know what I mean? You can't take that away from it. But at this point, like I'm not gonna go invest money to support and re-stimulate this thing that was tasteless at the time, is tasteless now, and I don't see why it. I don't know.
All right,
like
so
it
doesn't need to be there at all.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be there at all. Like it's not that we can't laugh at it. It's just that it's just understanding that for some people they really cannot laugh at it. They see that, and I saw that young, and I have 4 older sisters that were very militant in college and still are, and they watched that movie with me young, and I remember hearing their commentary on it, and it really sunk in that it really.
What was their commentary?
One of them actually had a boyfriend from one of the islands at the time, and I don't want to get the island wrong, so I'm not going to quote which one. But his name was Kingsley, and she was so offended by how it portrayed him as a man from the islands with that very close to that accent that was, you know what I mean, in school for his doctorate. And it always is something that negatively affects people. Like, you know what I mean? Like that for a lot of people. And especially, like, it's an interesting movie because it does harken to a lot of things that it talks about a lot of things. It's a pretty self-aware movie, you know what I mean? There's a scene where they talk about exactly how to make this man like a poor person. It's you take his family, you take his job, you break him down, you take all his community away from him. They know how it's done. So there's a little commentary in this movie, so it's not completely baseless. You know what I mean?
I'm glad you brought that up,
missed
Jacorey.
the mark on that,
Yeah,
you know?
I'm glad you brought that up, Jacorey, because that scene aside, the rest of the movie is about, look, it's about the environment, right? And you can take, this hustler Eddie Murphy character and put him and give him the lap of luxury in every opportunity, and he's just as good as the Dan Akroyd character at what he's required to do. And then, it's kind of a shocking miss at the end of that. Now, the 2 movies, there's this long history of blackface in movies, right? The one I immediately think of, and I suspect you guys may not even know this one, and I think we all have to agree that in spite of being satirical, this is a movie that is not to be commended. Soul Man. C. Thomas Howell takes a bunch of tanning medication so he can qualify for a scholarship.
And then again, from what I remember that movie. I've got 4 older siblings. 3 of them are women. So I remember you as the youngest kid, you end up watching things that are older than what you
Yeah, Trading Places at 4 years old. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I was like 7 or 8. You know, you watch a lot of older media.
Yeah, so you take all this in and you have these memories of how that went. I remember Soul Man. I haven't seen it in a very long time, but I remembered it. And from what I took in, I was like,
hold up.
They're trying to have this conversation again, like you said, Trading Places had this conversation. They're trying to have this conversation that this guy will go and he went and became black with some tanning pills, and he discovered how hard it is as a black person trying to make it in society, even if you're going to Harvard, I believe was the school, right? As a law student. So they're trying to make this point about society and how it treats people, but then are still somehow unaware of how they're perpetuating another aspect of that detrimental judgment on certain segments of our
In and of
society.
itself, it's almost insulting to say that in an hour and a half you can capture the full feeling of what it's like to suffer what's really 400 to 600 years of pain and torture and horrible treatment. And you can take that in an hour and a half of someone in tanning medication or brown face makeup, and now you understand. Like, that's weak. You know what I mean?
you know
Like,
what? And that's why, even as of
that's the only way you can do it. Like, I think you got to be better than that. I'm not the one making movies, so I can't really speak to that.
exactly, but that's it's at least what I was gonna say. It's exactly like what was it even only 2 years ago with the Oscars. Oscars so white hashtag went, and suddenly we have to realize you need to insert more black people in creating movies, not just putting them in position. Eddie Murphy was put in the movie. He was cast in the movie. He didn't write it. He didn't direct it. He didn't produce it.
Yeah.
So, in having black folks or people of color in whatever movie, not just black folks, in whatever kind of cultural movie you're gonna make, you need their input. You need them to help create it, or actually create it completely, because then it'll get the most accurate depiction of who folks are. And that's cool because it's starting to happen and starting to change more now. So I still think we can acknowledge what people have done wrong. We don't have to ignore it and go, oh my God, we as Americans like to sweep our ugly past under the rug and be, no, that didn't really happen. Slavery wasn't that bad. So our filmmaking was
it was bad?
that's not what our history books told us.
I know.
So if our movie making was that bad, understand it. We can continue to see what we did, and people should be embarrassed by it. It's okay, be embarrassed by it, because we're changing now. That's the only way to change is to acknowledge
And I think this DVD or Blu-ray release doing poorly is kind of part of that embarrassment.
Right.
You know?
So one other one I want to bring up, because we were talking about this a little bit, and this is a more recent example, and I know that there's some perception that people say, oh, it's being satirical, so it's okay. It's Tropic Thunder, and Robert Downey Jr. as this Australian actor who gets very into this method role and basically turns himself into a black man. And some people will say, hey, but it's okay because there's an actual black man calling him out on that in this movie,
So
right?
they're
And
taking part in it.
it's interesting because some people are saying, that's okay, right? And you had a very different reaction to that.
My first question was, did that black man write that movie? Because otherwise, again, he was put in the same position that Eddie Murphy was put in, where his superiors and the people around him, a production is a big moving thing with a lot of moving parts to it. And you as a small part of that, and as that side actor, can't really say yes or no to a role like that. So unless I know somebody of color wrote that role, I'm not necessarily comfortable with it. And again, you're gonna give an hour and a half to become a black man. You didn't. It's insulting. You can't become a black man. It's so much on a daily basis that you go through in your thought process and the way you operate and the way you maneuver around different situations that is not captured in an hour and a half movie of somebody that at the end of the day takes a shower and it washes off. You know?
You can have all the good intentions in the world, but there's one rule of thumb: just don't. Yeah, like it'll just, if Tropic Thunder was never made, we'd be okay.
Right.
The world would keep spinning.
Like, some people be like, oh, there was this movie that I imagined about an Australian actor who I never saw it. Because actually, it's what turned me off completely. I was like, what the is this? But the thing is, when something like that bothers me, it gets into the front part of my brain, and then I forget about it. I forgot all about this film just because I had no interest in it. So I never saw it. I never saw whatever potential good parts there were of it. So we'll get by without it.
Okay.
We did it, even as recently. What was that? 2010 or so? Maybe
yeah,
on this
that's
list?
not not that far back.
9 or 10.
Right.
It's long enough away, but it's close enough that we can understand that we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for coming by and sharing your perspective on this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
All right, thanks a lot.